Sometimes you have to pay a high price for it. And he did it. He just um, gambled on it, I think. Golden Age Hollywood once fancied itself a paradise of fairy tales, a place where elegant gentlemen sang to lull millions of hearts, where swashbuckling heroes swung their swords to rescue damsels, where studio lights turned ordinary people into flawless icons. Everything shimmered so brightly that audiences believed the love lives of those stars must be just as beautiful as the kisses they bestowed upon their muses on the silver screen. But the more that golden glow is stripped away, the clearer a bitter paradox becomes. Behind those cinematic smiles lay sobs smothered behind closed doors. Men hailed as the ideal gentleman. Courteous, kind, gallant, sometimes unleashed fists, insults, or drunken rage on the very women who shared their beds. Some sang about peace, yet beat their wives once the door clicked shut. Some were adored for honey-smooth voices, while their children grew up fearing the strap. Some were screen legends who made the public swoon, yet their wives lived each day as if walking on burning coals. Hollywood tried to conceal every bruise beneath studio powder and institutional power. Police were called, then quietly stepped away. Doctors saw the injuries, then fell silent. Reporters caught the scent of scandal, then were paid to forget. And it was time to open the door this industry kept locked for decades. Today, here are 11 Hollywood stars who abused their wives. Stay until the end of the video, because the last name will leave you stunned. 11. John Lennon, a peace icon, carrying a storm of violence within. From the moment the Beatles appeared, the narrative casts John Lennon as the voice of a generation longing for peace. He stands amid a sea of people, singing songs that make millions believe love can change the world. When Lennon and Yoko lie in a hotel bed, hand in hand calling for an end to war, the whole planet seems to exhale. This is pure love in an age of chaos. Then, in a 1980 interview, he strikes his own statue with a hammer. I used to be cruel to my woman, and physically, any woman. I was a hitter. I couldn't express myself, and I hit. I fought men, and I hit women. I was a violent man who has learned not to be violent and regrets what I've done. A line appears like a crack running across the face of the man who sang, "Give peace a chance." Inside this peace icon is a storm not easily tamed. According to the narrative, Cynthia, his first wife, felt that storm before anyone else. Early on, John gave her little doodles, kissed her hand before performances, but as time passed, those tender gestures faded. His temper grew to the point that Cynthia had to measure every step at home to avoid triggering an explosion. Outside, he was the musician who moved the world. Inside the small kitchen, he was a husband whose moods required tiptoeing. Then came Yoko. At first, many thought she had somehow tamed the wild wolf. In the early days of their love, Yoko recounts John behaving like a young man in his first romance, clumsily cooking soup, crossing half the city to buy the exact paper she liked, staying awake all night to hear her talk about art. But the sweetness was only foam on an overly strong cup of coffee. Over time, Yoko felt the apartment shrinking. Lennon was no longer the gentleman making morning tea. He grew private, unpredictable. Some nights he paced endlessly, breath quick, eyes darkened as if wrestling with something too large to voice. He slammed doors so hard the frames shook, then apologized in a small, childlike voice. His temperament became an invisible pressure, tightening the air around those who lived beside him. Yoko once sighed a sharp, weary truth. Living with a genius means living at the edge of an earthquake. The narrative concludes that the tragedy here is not hypocrisy, but a painful paradox. The world needed Lennon as a symbol of peace, while he himself held on to only a few fragile shards of peace inside. Outwardly, he sang about a world without war. Inwardly, he wrestled with a silent battle between old wounds and the desire to be good. His confession becomes the pivotal drop in this tragedy. He could write songs that softened humanity, but the hardest lesson was learning how not to hurt the people standing right beside him. 10. Frank Sinatra, a lover on stage, a nightmare behind closed doors. Frank Sinatra's voice once melted women across America. He sang as if whispering to each listener alone, offering a tenderness few could resist. Combined with his Rat Pack aura, cool, stylish, dangerously charismatic, Sinatra became the ideal lover in the imagination of an entire generation. But the moment the stage curtains closed, a completely different Sinatra appeared. The man who crooned "Strangers in the Night" could roar like thunder when jealous, disappointed, or simply when the bottle ran dry. The romantic rogue shattered so quickly, it stunned those who lived with him. Biographer Rebecca Santos once wrote, "Sinatra had numerous documented incidents of domestic violence and altercations, especially with his wives Nancy Barbato and Ava Gardner." A short statement, but enough to crack open a door the public never saw. Nancy Barbato, the first wife, witnessed the change early. She married him when his career was barely formed, and she endured escalating outbursts that grew in direct proportion to his fame. She rarely spoke of physical harm, but friends remembered the moments Nancy dodged questions about her reddened eyes or why she stayed silent an entire evening. Their marriage didn't end simply because of his temper. It ended because he treated infidelity like breathing, most notably with Ava Gardner. Gardner, however, was the one woman unafraid to speak plainly. "He hit me. Not often, but he did." In Hollywood at the time, such a sentence could have incinerated a major star's career. But Sinatra wasn't an ordinary man. He had studios protecting him, and more frighteningly, he had connections to organized crime, the kind police preferred not to provoke. Fights between him and Gardner were not uncommon. Gardner herself had a fiery temperament, so sometimes they clashed like two storms colliding. But regardless of who started it, Sinatra always held the advantage, stronger, more powerful, and backed by shadows capable of silencing anyone. That wasn't love. It was the perfect environment for abuse to thrive. Police were called many times, Santos said, but reports were rarely filed. No report meant nothing happened. Everything faded as if it had never existed. After Gardner, Sinatra married Mia Farrow, then Barbara Marx. He used his fists less, but his voice remained a weapon, shouting, threatening, bending emotions to his will. He would sing the sweetest love songs, then come home and scream with a force that crushed whoever stood in front of him, one insider recounted. The image of the passionate, devoted lover survived only in the place it was born, the stage. The world saw Sinatra as the man whose voice made a nation sigh with longing. Those who lived with him learned another truth. He could turn any room into a battlefield with a single burst of anger. 9. Bing Crosby, America's on-screen father, a terrifying shadow inside his own home. With a voice warm as glowing coal and a gentle, easygoing persona, Bing Crosby was once the post-war American ideal of a family man. Singing White Christmas in a cardigan with a soft smile, he looked like a father straight out of a Norman Rockwell illustration. But the very thing the public adored, his tender, velvety voice, was also the curtain hiding a far darker truth. Behind the mild smile, the narrative depicts a temper that made an entire household hold its breath. Offstage, he is described as a man who directed his blows at those weaker than himself, his wife, and his own children. In his 1983 memoir, Gary Crosby wrote that his father abused him and his brothers both physically and emotionally. Going My Own Way was not just a memoir. It was a peeling back of the glossy veneer Hollywood had polished for decades. The image of the lovable father shattered instantly. Through Gary's account, Crosby's first wife, Dixie Lee, appears as a shadow inside her own home. Gary describes her as living in fear. No one dared speak loudly. No one risked displeasing Bing. Dixie could not protect the children because she herself was a target of persistent, invisible intimidation. Crosby's discipline, as portrayed in the memoir, was systematic violence, leaving few marks, but planting fear deep enough to follow a child for life. Gary wrote, "He beat us with belts, with boards, with his fists. My mother couldn't stop him. The children were weighed weekly. Gaining weight meant a beating with a special leather strap, the switch, said to have a steel-weighted handle for extra pain. It wasn't punishment. It was cruelty, plain and simple." When the book came out, Hollywood was not surprised. Rumors had circulated for years. But Paramount had mountains of money invested in the gentle father image, and the studio system did what it did best: stay quiet, shield its star, and sweep everything away before the public caught the scent of scandal. Dixie Lee died in 1952 without ever speaking publicly about her marriage, partly because women of that era had little voice, and partly because few dared challenge an industry with almost limitless power to conceal. When Gary broke the silence, the family fractured. Brothers Philip and Dennis confirmed the accounts of abuse. Lindsay stayed quiet, but struggled all his life with addiction and depression before ending his own life. Dennis later followed the same tragic path. These deaths,